Between 1864 and 1871, a quiet woman walked through American history, leaving something terrifying behind her: death. At least 9 people died while living under the care of a woman named Lydia Sherman. 3 husbands, 6 children, every single one of them poisoned with the same silent killer, arsenic. But the most disturbing part of this story isn't the number of victims. It's how she did it. Lydia Sherman never ran. She never hid, and no one suspected the calm widow standing beside every coffin. Instead, she simply moved on, from one home to another, while the people around her slowly died. For nearly a decade, Lydia Sherman carried death with her like a shadow, and almost no one noticed. But the graves surrounding her did not belong to strangers. Many of them belonged to the people who had once called her family. To understand how it began, we have to travel back several years only into the crowded streets of New York in the 1860s. Lydia Sherman was born in Burlington, New Jersey in 1825. Like many women of her time, her future depended almost entirely on marriage. Opportunities for women were limited. If a marriage failed, there were very few ways to escape it. By her 20s, Lydia had married a New York police officer named Edward Struck. Together, they had 6 children and lived in a small working-class home in the city. From the outside, the family appeared ordinary. Just another struggling household trying to survive. But everything changed in 1864. Edward Struck lost his job with the police department. The loss destroyed him. Instead of finding new work, Edward withdrew from the world. He spent most of his time drinking and sitting quietly inside the house. At first, she endured it, but slowly her patience began to disappear. Frustration turned into anger, and anger eventually turned into a decision. Lydia bought arsenic. In the 19th century, arsenic was shockingly easy to obtain. It was commonly sold as rat poison in general stores. The powder was cheap, nearly tasteless, and almost impossible to detect. Even doctors rarely tested for it, because its symptoms looked identical to many common illnesses. Lydia understood that, so she poisoned him. That night on May of 1864, Edward Struck suddenly became violently ill. He complained of terrible stomach pain. Soon the vomiting began. Within days, he was
I cannot
dead.
explain it. The storm has passed.
The
but his
doctor
condition
diagnosed
worsens.
gastric fever.
The illness is
No one
taking him.
questioned it.
It is a tragedy.
Lydia mourned publicly like any widow would. Friends helped organize the funeral. Neighbors offered sympathy. After the burial, Lydia collected a small insurance payment. But Edward's death was not the end of the tragedy. In fact, it was only the beginning. Over the following months, Lydia's children began getting sick, one by one. George was the first, then William. Soon Margaret Ann became ill, then Annalisa. Each child suffered the same terrifying symptoms: violent vomiting, weakness that worsened quickly, and within days, and finally death. Lydia Ann. Each time the same doctor arrived. Each time the same explanation was given. Neighbors whispered about the tragedy surrounding Lydia Sherman. Losing so many children in such a short time seemed almost impossible to believe. People pitied her deeply. They comforted her. They believed she was a woman cursed by fate. No one imagined that the quiet mother, standing beside each small coffin, might actually be responsible. By the time the final child was buried, 5 of Lydia Sherman's children were gone. And still no one suspected her. So Lydia Sherman packed her belongings and quietly left New York. She traveled to Connecticut, looking for a new beginning. When Lydia Sherman arrived in Connecticut, she carried with her a reputation that would protect her for years. To everyone she met, she was a tragic widow, a woman who had already suffered more loss than most people could imagine. Few people questioned the quiet woman in black who spoke softly about the family she had buried. And before long, Lydia found exactly what she needed. Another
Lydia
husband.
Sherman, a widow seeking
His name was
shelter.
Dennis Hurlbut.
You poor
He was
soul.
77
Please
years
come
old,
inside.
a
You
respected
are most
farmer
kind,
in
sir.
Stratford,
Thank you.
Connecticut. A widower
Thank
who
you, Mrs.
lived alone
Sherman.
on his land
It's
and
been a
needed
long
someone
time
to
since
care
I've had
for him.
company.
It's no
To the
trouble at
people
all,
in
Mr.
town,
Hurlbut.
Lydia seemed like the perfect
A
companion
warm
for an
home
aging
and tea are
man.
comforts we all need.
She was attentive, polite, hardworking,
Do you,
and Dennis
Hurlbut,
Hurlbut
take this
quickly
woman to be
became
your
fond
wife?
of her. In 1868, the
And
two
do you,
were
Lydia
married.
Sherman,
For a
take
short
this man
time,
to be
life
your
appeared
husband?
peaceful. Neighbors saw Lydia tending the farmhouse and helping Dennis manage the property. To the outside world, it looked like the beginning of a quiet new life. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Because Lydia had not come to Connecticut simply to start over, she had come with a plan. Just as she had done years earlier in New York, Lydia purchased arsenic. The same powder. The same invisible poison. And soon the same deadly results. For a moment he lay there struggling to breathe. Then with great effort he tried to push himself up. Suddenly the truth began to form in his mind. The drink. Something had been put in the drink. Dennis lunged forward and grabbed Lydia by the throat. Then she shoved him backward with force. Dennis lost his balance and crashed back onto the floor. Without looking back, Lydia rushed to the door and ran out into the dark night, heading toward the small church at the edge of town. Behind her, inside the farmhouse, Dennis Hurlbut lay alone on the wooden floor. Within minutes, the room fell silent. When the doctor arrived, he knelt beside Dennis's body and checked his pulse carefully. Dennis Hurlbut was declared dead. Soon after, Dennis was buried in the small-town cemetery. Neighbors gathered around Lydia, offering sympathy and comforting words. But one man remained uneasy. The town doctor. He had seen many illnesses in his career. But something about Dennis's death continued to trouble him. Dennis Hurlbut's death should have ended the story, but it didn't. Days after the funeral, the quiet farmhouse in Stratford was
Sherman.
visited again, this time by an investigation
Dennis attacked
team.
me last
The
night.
team began
He grabbed me
asking
by the
Lydia
throat.
Sherman questions.
He was so
Lydia
angry.
answered every question
I barely
calmly.
escaped.
Her story never changed. She explained that Dennis had suddenly become
Dennis
ill.
attacked me during the night.
She told them she had tried to help him.
But the bruise
She
is
said she had
fresh.
run for help as soon as she realized how
There were
serious
no
it was.
marks on Dennis's hands.
One of the investigators found a small bottle hidden among the kitchen supplies, arsenic. The doctor immediately recognized the danger. Arsenic was a powerful poison.
Mrs. Sherman,
When Lydia was asked about
why
the
would a
bottle, she
farmer
didn't
keep poison
hesitate.
like this beside his dinner table?
She explained
Dennis
that
used it
Dennis
to
kept
kill
it to
rats
kill
in the
rats
barn.
around the farmhouse. Now the doctor's suspicion had become something
The test
much
confirms
stronger.
it. Arsenic.
The investigators made
We
a
must speak
decision.
with Lydia.
Dennis Hurlbut's body would be exhumed.
Yes, at the church.
Days later, the coffin was lifted from the cemetery, and the doctor carefully collected samples for testing. The samples tested positive for arsenic.
Mrs. Sherman,
Dennis Hurlbut had not died from illness.
Dennis Hurlbut's death was
He had been
caused by
poisoned.
arsenic. The analysis
With that
is
evidence in
conclusive.
hand,
This bottle
authorities moved
confirms it.
quickly.
You must come with me for
Lydia
questioning.
Sherman was arrested and taken into custody. The quiet widow who had once received sympathy from the town was now being escorted to jail. People in Stratford began to wonder something far more terrifying. If Dennis Hurlbut had been poisoned, was he the first? Lydia Sherman's arrest
How many
shocked the town
others?
of Stratford. The quiet widow
People
who had
die
stood
every day,
beside her,
Doctor.
husband's grave only
Sometimes
days,
they simply help
earlier was now
themselves.
sitting in a jail cell, accused of murder. But as investigators continued digging into her past, the story became even darker. The poisoning of Dennis Hurlbut was no longer the only tragedy connected to Lydia's name. Authorities began examining the events of her life before she arrived in Connecticut. Records from
Dennis.
New York revealed a disturbing pattern. Years earlier, Lydia's first husband, Edward
Dennis
Struck,
may not be the
had
only
died
victim.
suddenly after a violent illness. Soon after that, several of her children had also died under mysterious circumstances. At the time, those deaths had been
She shows
blamed on
no
disease and
remorse.
bad luck.
Trial at last.
Piece by piece, the case against Lydia Sherman grew stronger. Yet throughout the trial, Lydia remained strangely calm.
The chemical
She
test
listened
confirms
quietly
it.
as witnesses
Dennis
spoke
Hurlbut
about
died from
poison,
arsenic
illness,
poisoning.
and death. Her expression rarely changed. Finally, the jury reached its decision. Lydia Sherman was found guilty of murder. she was sentenced to life in prison. Soon after the trial, Lydia was transported to Wethersfield State Prison in Connecticut, where the heavy iron gates closed behind her for the final time. There she would spend the rest of her life. Lydia Sherman died in prison in 1878. But even with the verdict delivered, many questions remained unanswered. Authorities had proven Dennis Hurlbut's murder, but the other deaths connected to Lydia's life were never fully investigated. 3 husbands, 6 children, 9 lives lost, and a poison that left almost no trace.